was an accident of my birth, that I happened to have been born into the Christian faith, and I recognized instantly that had I been born in, say, Afghanistan or born in India, I would have believed very different things. And that quite rightly shook my faith in the particular religion that I'd been brought up in. Weirdly, and I now don't understand why, I seem to have lost those doubts when I was about 13, and I was confirmed into the Church of England. I went to Oxford after having lost my faith for good at the age of about 15 or 16. That was because I discovered Darwinism. I recognized that there was no good reason to believe in any kind of supernatural creator. And my final vestige, last vestige of religious faith disappeared when I finally understood the Darwinian explanation for life. I went to Oxford. I got a doctorate at Oxford eventually. I went to the University of California at Berkeley as a very young assistant professor, teaching, in those days, animal behavior. I then went back to Oxford after about 2 years at Berkeley and continued my career as a student of animal behavior. About 1972, there was a general strike in Britain, and there was no electric power. I couldn't do my research, and so I thought I would write a book. And I started to write a book, which eventually became my first book, The Selfish Gene. However, unfortunately, the electric power came on again, and so I shelved the first 2 chapters of the book that I'd already written, put them in a drawer and forgot about them, until about 3 years later in 1975, when I got a sabbatical leave and resumed writing The Selfish Gene. Since then, I've written about 8 more books: Extended Phenotype, The Blind Watchmaker, River Out of Eden, Climbing Mount Improbable, Unweaving the Rainbow, A Devil's Chaplain, The Ancestor's Tale, and most recently, The God Delusion, which is the subject of tonight's debate. I regard it as an enormous privilege to be alive, and I regard it as a privilege to be alive, especially at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, a privilege to be a scientist, and therefore to be in a position to understand something of the mystery of existence, why we exist. I think that religious explanations, although they may have been satisfying for many centuries, are now superseded and outdated. I think, moreover, that they're petty and parochial, and that the understanding that we can get from science of all those deep questions that religion once aspired to explain are now better, more grandly, in a more beautiful and elegant fashion explained by science.
Thank you, Professor Dawkins. Dr. Lennox.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. Each one of us has a biography and a worldview, our set of answers to the big questions that life throws at us. And so a little about my biography. I'm married to Sally. We have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. I work now in the University of Oxford as a mathematician and as a philosopher of science. I was born in the middle of the last century in a country with a tragic reputation for sectarian violence, Northern Ireland. My parents were Christian, but they were not sectarian. In the book, The God Delusion, Richard, you say that religion teaches us that it is a virtue to be satisfied with not understanding. Well, whatever other religion this may apply to, it certainly did not apply to the Christianity my parents taught me from the Bible. They encouraged me to be intellectually inquisitive because they were like that themselves. Not in spite of their Christian faith, but because of it. And I owe them an immense debt for setting me free to read everything from Marx and Russell to C.S. Lewis, and developed in those days an interest in the big questions of life. I was very fortunate to get the chance to leave Ireland and go to Cambridge, where I could indulge my passion for mathematics and for science in general. And Cambridge not only gave me the opportunity to develop those intellectual pursuits, but it gave me the opportunity to meet many people of other worldviews who did not share my background and my convictions. As a result, I developed a considerable interest in atheism, an interest which led me subsequently as an Alexander von Humboldt Fellow to study in Germany and then travel very frequently to Eastern Europe during the period of the Cold War. After the fall of communism, I went very often to the academies of science and universities in Russia to discuss and reason about these things and to see at first hand the effect of systematic exposure to atheist indoctrination over the preceding 70 years. And so I too am very privileged to live at this time and to be involved in the public discussion of these issues. Now, reading Richard's book, I found absolutely fascinating because it strikes me as an impassioned crusade to warn his fellow human beings of the slavery, the oppression, and the mental and possibly physical tortures imposed on them by religion. And I actually feel a lot of sympathy for you on this particular point, because I myself am totally opposed to any religion that seeks to impose itself by force, or that takes advantage of or abuses people in any way. You cannot impose truth by force. And both of us, I think, hold that religion should be debated in a rational way as anything else. I share his passion for truth. Neither of us, mercifully, is a postmodern relativist. But as a passionate atheist, Richard is committed to the idea that God is a delusion. For him, ultimate reality, I take it, consists of the impersonal matter and energy of the universe. I believe the exact opposite. God, far from being a delusion, is real. Ultimate reality is a personal, eternal, and supernatural God who has revealed himself in the universe, in his word, the Bible, and supremely in Jesus Christ, his Son, who is Lord and God incarnate. Now, I'm very aware that this puts me, according to Richard's book, firmly in the category of those who sit fluttering among the dovecotes of the deluded, sucking my religious dummy, or pacifier as you call it in Alabama. You suggest that religion builds a firewall in the mind against scientific truth. Well, that might be tragically the case with some religions, but it's not so with biblical Christianity. Indeed, the reason, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm passionate about truth is that God is the God of all truth. One of the most famous statements that Jesus ever made was, "I am the truth." An astonishing assertion that, as C.S. Lewis pointed out long ago, is either megalomaniac, pathologically mistaken, or valid, since he is claiming not merely to say true things, although that is so, but claiming to be ultimate truth itself, the ultimate truth behind everything from the Andromeda Nebula to human life, conscience, and mind. Please note that what divides us is not science. We're both committed to it. What divides us is our worldviews, his atheistic, mine theistic, and Christian. Now, his book presents to us a grim world. It is a no-holds-barred attempt to deliver people from the dragon of religion so that they can lead a life of uninhibited self-fulfillment, unencumbered with the background threat of an imaginary God. And he says it looks bleak and cold, especially from the security blanket of religious ignorance. But, ladies and gentlemen, we need to take it seriously. If that's the way it is, then that's the way it is, and we need to face it. But we need to discuss it seriously and look at the evidence. Neither of us wishes to base his life on a delusion. But which is the delusion? Atheism or Christianity? That is for each of us to decide on the basis of the evidence, of course.
Thank you. The first thesis of Professor Dawkins' book, and each of these that's reflected in your program, is a summary. It's not a direct quotation, but the summary is, faith is blind, science is evidence-based. I have one excerpt